evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Should I say bienvenue? Thank you for coming to Darien Library as we continue our Spring Meet the Author series with a very special guest. I'd like to just take a second to mention that programs at Darien Library are made possible by our annual Friends of the Library campaign, so thank you for your continued support to make our programs and collections available to the community. Tonight's guest is a graduate of Harvard University who received her Master's of Philosophy from Oxford University and a PhD from Yale. She eventually became a Shakespeare professor, publishing an academic book with Oxford University Press. Currently, she's a full professor in the English department at Fordham University in New York City. She's also a best-selling romance author. But tonight, we will be hearing about her first memoir, Paris in Love, which chronicles the time she spent in the City of Lights with her family during a sabbatical from her job. And I just have to say, on a personal note, that I found this book hilarious. And at one point, she describes cleaning her dishes with sea salt for 2 months because she didn't realize that it was salt and not dishwashing detergent. And a couple summers ago, I was actually living in Paris and I was interning at the American Library there, and I was living in an all-girls dormitory, and I had been washing my clothes in the washing machine, and they just kept feeling sort of greasy, but they smelled good. And then I realized that I had just been using fabric softener the entire time and had never actually washed my clothing. So I really related to that. And that was something that I loved about the book, is it's just fun stories that take you away to Paris while you sit and read it, of being an expat and some of the funny things that happen along the way. So please join me in welcoming to Darien Library, Miss Eloisa James.
That's kind of an embarrassing way to start, but there you have a synopsis of my time in Paris. So I'm just going to start by telling you how this book came about. I never thought of writing a memoir, actually, but my mother died of ovarian cancer, and I was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple weeks later. And there's something about the moment when the doctor sits across from you and says the biopsy is positive, even if it's very early, which it was in my case, there was no danger, you change. It's that clarifying moment that comes up in a lot of memoirs, I think. And for me, it was not, I did not take to yoga or living in the moment or any of those good things, not yelling at my children. I decided I just wanted to be someone else rather than myself. And that meant I didn't want to live in New Jersey anymore. I should say the only bad review this has got is from the New Jersey Star Tribune. My husband's like, they deserve it. They have the right. I want to be someone else. I want to be someone who lived in Paris. I mean, if you're going to be someone else, let's be specific, right? So we took a sabbatical. We sold our house in New Jersey. We sold our cars. We uprooted the children. We had our kids in the kind of private school where they're in violin and this and that, and it's all supposed to get them to college. And we were like, right, we're going to Paris, and here's some Abercrombie and Fitch clothing because that'll make you popular in Paris, and goodbye, we're going. So we put them into an Italian school in Paris because they are bilingual. My husband's an Italian professor. And that turned out to be a bit of a shock. So what I didn't realize when I was writing this, that I really only realized afterwards, is that it was a very quick goodbye to my mother. If you know anything about ovarian cancer, it's a silent killer, and it does create a very fast goodbye. But the same year, my father was diagnosed with dementia, and he's an American Book Award winner, poetry, Robert Bly. And when I was growing up, he was spending a lot of his time writing prose poetry. So we would be having dinner, he would come in, he would stick a snail down in the middle of the table, and he'd say, before we have this pasta, we're all going to describe that snail. And we would all go, I know my 3 siblings are all business people, but I was the eldest and I was the most dutiful, so I would try to describe this snail in a prose poem. And what I found myself doing in this year was realizing that I didn't want to lose the year. You know, especially if you've had children, you know those years just flow through your hands like water. They're in front of you 1 minute, and the next minute they're 6'3", and they're gone. And in particular, I had the memory, my daughter Anna is very funny. She's the focus of a lot of the funnier stories in here. And so I had a very clear memory of laughing hysterically at her as she would imitate Ariel, the Disney princess. But all I have, she was 3 then, and I can't figure out why Ariel was funny. Because if you know anything about Ariel, she's not funny. So all I have is the memory of laughter. I don't have the memory of what she did. So I didn't want to write a memoir about this year. All I wanted to do was capture what was actually happening so that I could remember it, in case I was facing dementia or a more grave cancer diagnosis. I wanted to go somewhere different. I wanted to run away from home, just the way you do when you're 6 years old. You take your passy and take your blanket and head out the front door. And I wanted there to still be adventure, to still be able to say, yes, I'm a mother. Yes, I hope my kids get into college someday. But you know what? I'm not going to live my life for them. We're going to go. And so what I started doing was using my Facebook page. Because I'm a romance author, of course, I had this Facebook page. And that space that's allowed in the update was about the same as my father was giving us for the snail or the shell or whatever it was he stuck on the paper. And I thought, okay, this is discipline, right? You have to post every day or your publishers will write you a letter. And if any of you are writers, you know that if you miss 3 days of social media, your publishers will write you a letter and say, dear Eloisa, something seems to be wrong. And you have to post. So I just started posting. I used it as a way to force myself to see what was going on. But not only, I didn't want to remember it, I wanted to put it on paper as it happened. So when this book actually went up for auction, because after a while people were following the page, and a writer friend of mine started doing a parody on her Facebook page. So every time I said, I've been out, I've been eating madeleines, she would say, and I went to 7-Eleven and I had a ho-ho. She's from Minnesota, so I would describe the Seine and she would do a Minnesota lake. And in the way of Facebook, this went viral, and I have now like 35,000 fans who are expecting me constantly to describe Paris, which I don't because I live in New York. But of course, editors started following it. And a bunch of them said, we want you to rewrite it in narrative form. And I said, I'm not going to. We had no house, right? So we had to buy an apartment in New York, so money was definitely an issue. But even so, to rewrite it in narrative form would be to put it all in the past tense. It would make it into this flow of narrative that would change the moment that I wanted to remember. I didn't want to remember, oh, we had such a great time in Paris. I wanted to remember explicitly what Anna was doing that Tuesday, what Luca did when this happened. So they were going to school on one side of Paris. Our apartment was in the 9th on the other side of Paris. So I would drop on off and I would walk all the way back. And every day the challenge was you have to find something. It has to be something someone said, something you saw, something to describe. And those became the small pieces of this book. Now, I then wrote 12 short essays that are in between, some of which are about Paris and some of which are about memory, grief, memory, and forgetting. But let me give you an example. I had to introduce everyone in the beginning because I created little threads that went all the way through. One of them was about our dog Milo. If you look at the cover here, you'll see that I have gone back to age 20, which is nice. You see that my husband's back here with his white hair, so he got to say the same. So it's kind of like I'm 20 and there's my future. And Milo, who is a 26-pound Chihuahua, became very much thinner and more svelte. This illustration was done by someone who works at Paris Vogue. Nice. So, let me just start. We are the sometime owners of an obese Chihuahua named Milo, who traveled regularly between the United States and Italy until one fateful August, when Air France declared he was too fat to board their plane. This was a terrible moment, because Milo had come back and forth with us for years and getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And then we went to the airport and they said, we're not putting him on the plane. We had to call my mother-in-law, Marina. She had to come get him in disgrace. And she kept him. Since then, he has lived in Florence with Alessandra's mother, Marina, whose cooking has had a further ruinous effect on his waistline. I think it's fair to say he has no waistline. Today, Marina called to say that stress has given Milo a few more pounds, though the vet unsympathetically suggested that the weight gain was the result of an overindulgence in prosciutto. The source of Milo's stress is hard to pinpoint. Among other indulgences, he literally sleeps on a velvet cushion, like the emperor's cat in a fairy tale. But Marina claims that the mere presence of other dogs on the street, and by extension in the world, is very upsetting for him. There's my introduction to Milo. Here's Anna. Anna flung open the door of the apartment after school. Mom, I was attacked today. What happened? I asked. A girl named Domitila slapped me. Anna said, her eyes opened very wide. She said I was screaming in her ear, and I should say that Anna undoubtedly was screaming in this girl's ear. We chose Anna's former school in New Jersey with an eye towards just this kind of encounter. They devoted a great deal of time to teaching the students to reject violence, studying Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and practicing conflict resolution for an hour every Friday. I inquired, hopefully, how Anna responded to her first real taste of playground aggression. I slapped her right back, my daughter explained. My hand just rose in the air all by itself. There you have Anna. So here's one of the examples of what I tried to describe. Because I walked through the city over and over again, when it actually came to editing this book, I chose the things that I liked the most. And I happen to be someone who can't stand the Louvre. Do you know that if you went to the Louvre and you spent 5 minutes in front of every picture, it would take you 3 years to go through? Like, my life is not long enough. So what I did was find small museums and take our visitors to them over and over again. Because another fact is, if you ever go to Paris and you rent a large apartment, you will meet everyone you ever knew in your earlier life, including your boyfriend of 5 minutes freshman year who will arrive with his wife and his children. So we had a constant stream of visitors, which was fine because I ended up going through these small museums 2 or 3 or 4 times and then finding the one thing that I liked the best and putting that in the book. So my favorite of Paris's many bridges is Pont Alexander III. And my favorite of its many statues is not one of those covered with gold, but rather a laughing boy holding a trident and riding a fish. Although just a child, he's bigger than I am, his huge toes flying off the fish as he twists in midair. But he's a boy still, with a guileless smile, caught in a moment when he is big enough to ride the back of a fish, but not yet acquainted with the world's sorrows and deceits. On the far end of Pont Alexander III, opposite the mer boy, sits his twin sister. She seems to have just left the water. She holds fronds of seaweed in one hand, and in the other a large seashell to her ear. Her face is intent as she looks into the distance, listening carefully. I imagine that she is listening for the rushing sounds of waves, the sound of home. Now, another thing that happened is Alessandro, I don't speak a word of French. And you have to make a decision when you're going to France, whether you're going to try to become one of those Americans who goes over there and is like speaking French right and left and trying to blend in very unsuccessfully with the populace. This was not going to happen to me. If I tried to speak French, it would have a Minnesota accent. It's dead in the water instantly. So I decided I was going to be like a dragonfly. I was just going to watch, right? I didn't want to immerse myself in French culture. I wanted to watch French culture. I was exhausted, as I'm sure many of you, any of you who've been through cancer stuff know. It's exhausting. And the year after, you're just kind of like, whew, I'm still alive. So Alessandro, however, speaks about 5 languages, decided he wanted to improve his French because he's the chair of the Italian department at Rutgers. He's a Dante scholar. And he was zipping around and giving talks at the Sorbonne and Paris-8 and all these universities. So he had 2 conversation partners. Today, Alessandro had his first meeting with a Frenchman from the Conversation Exchange website. His name is Florent, and he wants to learn Italian because he's bought a plot of land in a tiny village near Lucca in Tuscany, and he plans to build a house there. But mostly because he is in love with a waitress he met in the village. Apparently, she is very, very shy and reserved. So Florent's story goes right through this book as well. Another thing I tried to do is just capture what it's like to live in Paris in the moment, as it were. So here's one. It's snowing again, and the roofs opposite my study window have turned white. The sky is precisely the same milky color, so where the black notched roof ridge meets the sky, it looks like a black railway track stretching across some vast and snowy Russian landscape. After careful inspection, this is dealing with a visit that my mother-in-law and Milo paid us for several months over Christmas, Marina decided this morning that Milo has gained weight since arriving in Paris. This caused a crisis, exacerbated when Anna confessed that Milo had just snatched and eaten a chocolate cell phone. Contrary to everything we heard about dogs' chocolate's toxicity to dogs, Milo remains hale and hearty, not to mention hungry. He has indeed gained a Parisian pound and will be allowed no more holiday prosciutto. In case you're wondering, he's probably eaten more prosciutto in his short life than all of you put together. He has it for lunch and dinner. Anna owns a hotly prized possession, a tiny pink eraser in the shape of a hamster, given to her by her cousins in Michigan. So you see, Anna explained, Everyone loves it because Paris doesn't have anything like this. Oh, those deprived Parisians. Apparently, of all the kids, Domitila loves it the best. She said, I love it, I adore it. Please, can I play with it? And? I prompted hopefully, but Anna gave me a scornful look. Yesterday, to Anna's delight, Domitila was unceremoniously tossed out of class and told to wait on a bench until school was over, a few minutes. Alas, today Anna was bounced out of the same math class to the same bench. I pointed out that perhaps she and Domitila were more alike than Anna might like to believe. So why were you kicked out of class? I asked. Rambunctiousness, Anna said morosely. That teacher doesn't understand my sense of humor. It's one of the things that was rather a shock for us is that Anna doesn't look at all like someone who would know the principal's offices on both sides of the Atlantic, but she does. She's just got that innate ability. Today I asked if Alessandro would pick up some of the spectacular chocolate mousse made by a patisserie on Rue Richer. His response, I thought you were on a diet. Those 7 words rank among the more imprudent things he has said to me in the long years of our marriage. So if you know one thing about Paris, it's about the food, right? And so, yeah, over the year, I kind of gradually became much more curvy. And this was, not what the French women were doing, for one thing. Alessandro just came back from his conversation exchange. Florent is devastated. He logged onto Facebook and discovered that the object of his adoration, the waitress in Italy, has changed her status. She's in a relationship, Florent says. He says dolefully that she made a point of not telling him in person and that he's very hurt by her indirect methods. I think that given his scanty Italian and her completely non-existent French, she may never have figured out his passion, let alone his honorable intentions. After all, he never employed the romantic phrases that Alessandro taught him. So Alessandro every week was teaching Florent all these phrases, because in Italy, for example, you don't say ti amo the way we do, which is I love you. We say it to everyone, right? Ti amo to the dog, the cat, whatever. You say ti voglio bene to someone who you care for and you love in the way that we think of love, but you save ti amo only for the person, only for affairs of the heart. It's very sweet, and there's, it's very Italian. There are all these subtle gradations of what you can say and can't say. And Florent will get so mixed up in all these phrases, he never mentioned to say any of them. And besides, I do think it's hard to say them when she's clearing your table, You're supposed to say, ti amo. So, there's been a very interesting development in Florent's life. During today's conversation session, he apparently did not even mention the cruel-hearted Italian waitress, but talked the entire hour about a woman he has known for 1.5 years, just as a friend. She teaches French language and literature in the same middle school as Florent. He always thought she was interested, but obsessed by his waitress, had never really considered the possibility. Now, he has. Marina called from Florence to report that Milo had suddenly toppled off the couch. After some consternation on the part of herself and all her neighbors, and if you know anything about Italian culture, all her neighbors gathered, they determined that he had a digestive problem. I should say that he looks like a sofa with little legs underneath. He's a purebred Chihuahua, believe it or not, at 26 pounds. Charcoal was suggested as the remedy. On the first attempt at administering it via a prosciutto delivery method, Milo gobbled the prosciutto and spat out the hidden charcoal. Ditto the second attempt. The third offering, however, was devoured whole, and he has not fallen off the couch since. Now you know what to do if you ever fall off a couch. On our return to Florence, we traveled a bit when we were there, so there's descriptions of us in Venice, and then we went to Florence. Alessandro and I went to Germany for a while and came back. I keynoted the Shakespeare Association in Germany. On our return to Florence, Marina announced with triumph that while we were in Venice, she had found a good veterinarian, not like that scoffing fellow who adjusted at Milo's waistline. This new vet reportedly said it was not Marina's fault that Milo has become a 27-pound Chihuahua. It was our fault, because we had him fixed. Neutered dogs are all obese, Marina informed me. In vain do we protest that America is a nation of normal weight dogs, missing some dangling bits. We fly back to Paris tomorrow, which is a very good thing in terms of family harmony. This is a constant battle between Alessandro and his mother, and she actually called last week because, of course, summer's coming, which means July's coming, which means we're going to visit Florence. So she called last week and she said, Milo has gained a little weight. So I fear he's now a 28-pound chihuahua. But Alessandro reported today that Florent is much more in love with his colleague Pauline than he ever was with the Italian waitress. After all, they can talk to each other, he said. That's important, don't you think? It is generally agreed that communication is an essential part of a relationship. Yes. He's so French, Alessandro said of Florent upon returning home from the conversation exchange today. He goes on and on about Pauline, so passionate, so in love. But has he told her anything? No. According to my husband, if Florent were Italian instead of French, he would be booked into the honeymoon hotel already. And I have to say, remembering Alessandro's style of courtship, that's probably true. Last night, the air was so warm and beautiful that Alessandro and I walked much farther than usual, all the way past would-be aristocrats enjoying champagne on the lawns of the Louvre, down through the Tuileries toward the Opera, at last collapsing into Café de la Paix with its gaudy, gilded, but quite lovely ceiling. My hot chocolate came in 2 silver pitchers. One held melted chocolate, as thick and dark as lava, the second steaming milk. Pure heaven. I discovered a lot of chocolate in Paris. Also not good for my waistline, but whatever. I'm sitting at my desk just before 7 in the morning. The sky outside my study window is a kind of pearl blue, so pale that it looks like the shadow of blue, or the memory of blue. Swallows are swooping over the rooftops across from me, flashing black across the sky, and disappearing again. Florent and Pauline have finally broached the subject of romance with each other. Alas, when he laid his heart at her feet, she replied that she was not ready for a long-term commitment. He replied that she was like a lemon tart that he could see in the window but couldn't eat. He won my heart with that metaphor, although Alessandro pointed out, once again, that if Florent were Italian, he'd be in the patisserie and picking up the tart already. Here's one little description of one of the museums. I went to the Musée Carnavalet, which is the museum of the history of the city of Paris. That means that everything except the kitchen sink is thrown into there. It's actually quite large. It's got nearly 100 rooms. But it's not a collection of great art. It's a collection of real rooms. So when you go in, they're historically authentic rooms, which are completely carved out of their original place and just stuck into this musée. So you have Louis XVI's Salon Bleu. You have Marie Antoinette's drawing room. You have Marcel Proust's bedroom. It just goes right through the centuries of famous people. So I said, given the chance, I have to admit, I would choose gawking at famous people's bedrooms over great art every time. Clearly the sign of a superficial mind. But Florent's end of school dinner wore on into the night, eating, drinking, smoking, celebrating. In the end, he and Pauline left the restaurant together and walked around the city. They wandered from the Bastille down to Rue Faubourg Saint-Antoine, then turned up Boulevard Voltaire to the Rue Publique, talking madly, walking until dawn. Finally, when the sun was just pink over the Seine, Pauline looked at him and said, "You compared me to a lemon tart that you could not eat." He nodded. She opened her bag, and nestled in the bottom was a perfect little lemon tart. And that is why we think the French are romantic, because you know what, they really are. If you go on my website, you will see a picture of Florent and Pauline who are planning to have a baby. It's very nice. Now, one of the things we did, since my children were not having any soccer, no athletics of any kind, because the French don't believe in it, so the school had no program at all. And they weren't having any kind of cultural engagement because there was no violin lessons, and we were so busy trying to get them to pass school, that was absorbing in itself. So one of the things we did at the end of the year was we threw them into camp. We put Luca into tennis camp and on into 2 weeks of tennis camp, and then we put Luca into 2 weeks of French camp as well. And they weathered, this is, if you ever want your kids to speak a foreign language, over years of making my kids bilingual, I can tell you that the trick is to go over to whatever country it is and put them into camp with kids of their own age, not into camp with Americans, into proper tennis camp. So Luca was fighting the idea of French camp. He was fighting, screaming to the very end. But Luca called from French camp, which is apparently far, far better than Italian camp. For one thing, there are girls. French girls. Didn't this salient fact occur to him when he was making our life miserable, insisting that he could not go, and we could not make him? And again, if you want to see Luca and his friend Lavinia, who's pretty much one of the most beautiful girls I'd ever seen in my life, sitting in front of the Eiffel Tower, it's on the Paris in Love book site, and he explains why he hated to come back. And luckily she visits. So I am going to read now, I think, part of one of the longer essays, and then I can answer questions, or I can read another essay, whatever you'd like. So a few years ago, a friend invited me to her house to meet another friend of hers, an academic named Rose, who was being treated for recurrent ovarian cancer. This is something that I'm quite familiar with. Because I write historical romance, I have lots of friends and readers who would be reading, say, the 1,000 pages of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, but they become tired of the smell of beach, the bleach, the tick of the IV, the exhaustion of being with their mother in the hospice or dealing with their own cancer, or whatever it is, and they turn to romance for escape. And that's what genre fiction is brilliant at. It's not catch-22. It's not going to change America's attitude towards war. But if you're in a very tough spot, it will give you that hour or that day of escape that you might well need. So I girded my loins for a less than cheerful encounter with an emaciated and wan cancer patient. But instead, Rose sat at the end of the table, round and rosy, bellowing with laughter and wearing a huge platinum Marilyn Monroe wig. I learned that her own hair was black, and she wore a cropped shirt and standing straight up, bleached on the ends, so she looked like a blown dandelion. But she liked to wear the Marilyn Monroe wig now and then because, as she explained, it is impossible to pity a woman who is wearing a stylized wig of 1950s curls. At least not because she's terminal. So she and I became BFFs, with all the irony that term implies. Best friends forever, right? The wig, incredible laughter, outside signs of remarkable courage. Every once in a while, her doctors would say, well, the cancers beat the chemo, and then they would try something else. And all along, she kept teaching and translating poetry and traveling to Latin America to discover new poets. She brought several poets who'd never been translated into England into America. Once she called me from the top of a Peruvian mountain. She sounded as if she were next door. It's so beautiful here, she said. You must come before you die. Now, Rose was not afraid to say that. She had the gift of knowing very concretely that her time was limited, though she certainly didn't welcome the end. She loved the Dominican Republic, so we traveled there together. We went to this amazing resort called Paradise, which, was somewhat, its claims to being paradise were definitely complicated by the presence of a lot of extremely beautiful prostitutes. But other than that, we had a great time. We swam with the dolphins, who were incredibly uninterested in us, but you sort of hankered after them the way you would after a movie star. It was just lovely. Anyway, it was one of the deep unfairnesses, right? My cancer just whisked away. It's over. Hers, doctors could not get used to. So I said, please come to Paris. Come visit us. And she came to see us just before she left, and she said, no, I'm going into hospice now. I'm going to stop the chemo. So she said, I'll call you when you need to come home. So it was just a few months into our time. And one of the things that was odd for me, my mother was amazingly creative. And you're lucky enough to be on the drugs that was on, you will know why. Because she was completely drunk, right to the last day. She was great. She had a wonderful time. She said, I'm having a great death. And she said, there are horses tangling in my covers and tingling with my toes. The last thing she said to me was, you have a lovely smile. I had no idea whether she knew who I was, but she was happy, and I was glad I was smiling at her, and she was enjoying the smile. It was all going well, right? It was, you cry for yourself in that situation. You don't cry for my mother. She'd said her goodbyes. But Rose couldn't take that medicine, and so it was a lot tougher. So I said goodbye to her, begged her to meet my children if by any horrible chance they crossed the same bridge she was going to cross. She loved Luca and Anna as much as we did. And so I packed up. I went back to Paris. A short time later, a book-sized parcel arrived to me. So Rose died a couple days after I left. Now this is coming 2 weeks after her death, and it was from Rose. It was a last dash of that kind of loving attention that she gave so freely, and I thought it would be one of those Latin American poets. She was always reading them to me, never mind the fact that I understood no Spanish any more than I do Italian. She'd read them anyway. They sounded lovely. They would kind of rush by me, and I thought, well, she's going to send me one of those books of poetry, but it wasn't. If any of you have read this book, it was W.G. Sebald's Austerlitz. It's a novel about memory, about forgetting, about the longing to forget, and the longing to remember. So our year in Paris, it was kind of like spending a year in paradise. We came back together as a family. We stopped, being in the minivan and driving here and driving there. And, we had au pairs living with us for years. With time to talk, and surrounded by people who spoke French, we started talking to each other all the time. The four of us became much closer. My husband and I mended the kind of invisible cracks that happen in any marriage where you're just rushing past each other all the time. We started having breakfast together and lunch together. It was paradise. I often thought about Rose, right, with her Marilyn Monroe curls and her big laugh and her fearless before you die. And I walked the streets of Paris and I would miss her. The impetus to move to Paris, to sell the house and the cars and simply fly away, sprang from my mother's death and my own brush with cancer. But I really wonder if I would have acted on that lesson without learning from Rose. So this book is my phone call, not from the top of the mountain or from the top of the Eiffel Tower. The here is negotiable. It's so beautiful here. You must come before you die. Thank you. So I don't know how long this is supposed to go, so I can read more, I can answer questions, or what would you like? Questions sound good? All right, who has questions? Remember, I'm a teacher, I'll call on you. Yes.
Okay, about 35 years ago, I was in the Navy, and I took leave to go to Paris.
Great.
We were in some small town. I was on a helicopter carrier. And when I went to Paris, I would ask for directions. Being that I was an American that didn't speak French, people didn't know anything. They were dumb about everything. They wouldn't help you. I'm wondering, how was your experience?
It's totally changed.
People?
Absolutely. I went to France the first time right after college, so in the 80s, and I encountered some really rude people. I didn't encounter any. Really, none. You go in there with a credit card and a smile, it's fine.
Well, I found in the small towns,
Right.
oh, they treated you like gold, but once you went to Paris,
Right. I can't, we had one nasty encounter with an archetypal French waiter, and I have immortalized him in this book. And I'm thinking of sending the book to the restaurant just to get my true revenge, but literally he was the only one. I think there are very bad sides to the recession, and then there are very good sides. And also, the world is so small now. I mean, we didn't really encounter anyone who didn't speak French, and all I can say literally is like bonjour, nothing. And I don't look at all French, so no one even mistook me for French, right? They knew instantly I was American. The interesting thing was when I went off to Germany, Alessandro, of course, speaks German. He was like, he couldn't come for 2 days. We were going to his Shakespeare Association. He was going to follow me. And he was like, don't worry about it. Everyone in German speaks English. You'll be just fine. So I get on the train, and I'm going along, and I go to this town where the Shakespeare Association is, and I find the one other American who's been flown over there. We were the two keynotes, because we work on London. And he and I set out. Not a soul in that restaurant spoke English. The waiter's like, asking in German, anyone speak English? Zero, crowded restaurant. They go back and ask all the waiters, nobody. They find the chef. Chef comes out of the back and he's like, sardines, meat. He didn't know what kind of meat it was. We got these amazing meals. And I called up Ollie that night and I was like, you lied to me. And he said, oh, that was one of a kind. Exact same thing the next day. So then he showed up and he was like, now everything's going to be fine because I am here and I speak German. And the funny thing was, he loves to swim, and I had to do the conference during the day. So he went and he asked for a swimming pool. And he didn't ask for it correctly. So when he got there, it was a swimming pool, all right, but it was what's called textile-free. Think about that for a minute. And there were 26 saunas of different kinds. The TV sauna, the Himalayan sauna, the roses sauna. And he, he's Italian, so, he's fine with a certain level of nudity, but he was like clutching his little towel, right? And the pool was about from here to here, and it was kidney-shaped and clearly meant to lounge around, right? It was not for doing laps, which is what he was looking for. So he came back somewhat chastened. He was like, all right, so maybe my German's not as good as it was 20 years ago. But he thought we should go back together. And I said, no textile-free. But even there, everyone couldn't have been lovelier in Germany. They just didn't know what I was saying. And I didn't know what I was eating. So. Yes?
So have you been able to preserve this sort of family unit stuff that you had in Paris and New York?
You know what? It took us a good part of the year to figure out what it meant to simply trap the children at the dinner table. Because, we now have 2 teenagers under our roof. But we got in the habit. And this book does not fit in with, I think, a lot of those French books that are out right now saying that, the French are so much better parents. I made friends over there. My friend Sylvia is no better parent than any of us are. She's a banker. She has a nanny. She works like crazy. She's not totally thin. She's just like us, right? She's just like us. She lives in a suburb of Paris. And once I was asking her, I was like, well, you seem to be really happy. I thought all French women had affairs. And she was like, oh la la. She said, no, only Parisians. So in the suburbs, they don't have affairs. But my point was that the one thing she does is when she's able to be home for dinner, which is not all that often, they do sit around and just talk. And we managed to preserve that. We have now an apartment in New York, and it has an eat-in kitchen that goes around like this, and 2 people can sit there and 2 are trapped inside. My husband and I looked at that right away, and we were like, right, we have the outside. That way nobody can storm out or go, just, God, you're so boring, I can't stand here another minute. They're stuck. So, yeah. There's a mending process that follows any family that goes through one parent having cancer. And we were very lucky to be able to have that year. And, the whole family calmed down, the children too. It's hard for them, scary for them, because their grandmother had just died, and then I'm like, oh, well, guess what? So from their point of view, especially from Anna, she was only 10, it was nerve-wracking. So, yes?
When you decided to run away, why did you pick Paris?
Well, I was in Paris my junior year. I did a junior year abroad, and I had a great time, and I've always remembered it. And then, the obvious thing was to pick Florence, right? But to pick Florence meant living with my mother-in-law. And I love my mother. Marina's terrific. We arrive over there, the first thing she does is open up our suitcases, take out everything, and iron everything, including the underwear. You can only imagine her linen closet. It's like this, and then all the sheets are arranged, they're ironed, of course, then arranged by color, and then tied in a ribbon that matches the color with the, with the pillowcases on top. So we had done 2 6-month sabbaticals living with her, and I basically said, this is my runaway time. And, I would say, to Alessandra's credit, he was like, yeah. As long as you can find an Italian school. There was an Italian school in Paris, and there was one in Barcelona. And Paris won. Anything else? Yes?
Did the dog die?
No, he has not died, which Marina says shows that he's naturally meant to be fat. She says some people were meant to be fat and others were not. And she says that Milo is happy, and it is have to be said, Milo's an extremely happy dog. So the vet keeps putting him on a diet. He was on a diet last summer, and she was making lightly steamed broccoli, then pouring a little bit of homemade chicken broth on it, and then a little bit of butter to add flavor, of course. Milo never lost weight on this. So he is, however, a happy dog.
Is he Italy or is he here?
He's in Italy. He can't come back. He weighs too much.
I had a friend that had a Chihuahua, and he used to hide under the couch. He weighed 4.5 pounds. If your chihuahua weighs 26 pounds, this thing would hide under the couch. He was named Mighty Mouse,
Right.
and he would try to bite your Achilles tendon.
Oh no. Milo's a very nice dog. He's very cheerful. Why not be? He gets everything he wants. But you know, there is a story in here that's really funny, is that Milo likes to go behind the couch, you know? And one day, Marina called, treat, treat, you know? Tempo di mangiare, and Milo didn't come. I mean, that's just like, she was like, he's dead, he's dead. We're all running around the apartment looking for Milo. Milo had got stuck behind the couch. He couldn't get out. He was literally back there going like, trying to get out. And so now the couch is like, you know, a good foot away from the wall, so that Milo can still go back and not get stuck on the way to the kitchen, which is important for him. Yes?
I know in the back of the book that you list a lot of your favourite places that you discovered. Is there one in particular, apart from the museum that you mentioned, that sticks in your mind that you wanted to share with us?
Well, what I put in the back of the book, I decided if I was reading this book, I would want to know where my favorite places were. So I put in the back what you're mentioning, which is my idiosyncratic guide to Paris. So it's like museums that I liked, and then I tell you where to go have lunch too, because my view of what you should do if you're in Paris is you should go. So many people are only in Paris for 3 days, and they say, I'm going to do Paris. And I saw so many people going through Paris. I'd be walking across the Pont Alexander, and they would be walking, you know, both of them, with the cameras in front of their eyes, like this. They're not even living it. They're just taking it back, like trapping it to bring back home. So my goal for you would be that you leave your camera at home. That might involve leaving your iPhone at home, which might be too traumatic. But just forget the camera and go to a museum in the morning. Go to a small museum. Go have a fabulous lunch. Go have a nap. Then go do something. Go to a park. Go shopping. Do whatever. Take it easy. Remember that vacation is vacation. You come home happy rather than learned. It will count a lot in the long run. So I would say one of my favorite museums that no one goes to, one of the great things about these small museums is there's no wait. One of my favorite museums is the Musée Nissim de Commando. And this is an amazing museum. It was a count who, right before World War II, he was completely obsessed by the 18th century. So he bought all this stuff that had been in Versailles, and he built a house and he moved it in. And you know, he was a Jewish banker. So he never would have been able to be part of this salon life that he admired so much, but he completely reconstructed in his life. And he had a gourmet dining club that would meet and have these 40-course meals that, you know, Queen this and Queen that, Marie Antoinette had eaten. And he had 2 children, and it's very interesting because it was an arranged marriage between these huge banking families, and his wife ran off with an Italian baron, which Alessandro thought, well, he was Italian, right? So it's okay. But he left the kids. She left the kids, and she ran away to Italy, and he raised them very much the way a modern dad would now. You know, my dad was one of my brothers is actually was in a somewhat similar situation, but of course he had all the dad culture. But the Count seems to have actually played with his children and been with his children and raised those children rather than just consigning them to something that was a very close-knit family. And then his only son was drafted into World War I for France. So he was a flight pilot, and you can see pictures of him, very romantic. He was shot down and died. And at that point, the Count stopped having his salons, and he stopped having his gourmet parties, and he really withdrew into the house. And his daughter, Beatrice, got married and went and lived in the country, and you know, they had tons of money. And the Count then designated his house as a museum to the city of Paris and set up a huge fund so that it become a museum for Paris. It's part of the Musée Décoratif, because it's about the decorative arts, right? So it's my kind of thing, because it's all about what do people eat, what do they, you know, it's got wonderful paintings in them, but they're not by, you know, Vermeer, they're just lovely. So then World War II came, and he was dead. The house had been turned over to the city of Paris, and Beatrice, I think it is, was certain that nothing would happen to her and her children, because her brother had given his life for France, and his father had given his entire estate to France. And of course, that was not the case. They were turned over to my neighbors, and they all died in Auschwitz. And so it's you should go. You should go to this museum because on the one hand, it's incredibly beautiful. It's got these amazing things in it. He built beautiful rooms. But on the other hand, it's a real reminder that no matter how rich you are, you can't protect the one thing that matters the most to you, your children, right? One goes to war, the other goes to the other war, and that's it. So it's got this amazing story, and they have a little film that you can watch at the end. It took me 3 visits to the museum before I figured out what the story was, basically based on my complete lack of French. But I've told you the story, so when you go to the museum, you'll be able to see what it is without knowing what they're saying. Because the first time I sat through the film, I was like, wow, everybody's crying. Right? All these French people are all crying. And you got to do the French justice. They have made a beautiful museum out of this thing. Do not shrink from the fact that the French then put Beatrice and her children in Auschwitz, and they died. So it's all out there. And that's one really interesting thing about France that I really noticed because I was watching things like one of the schools that my children were going to, there's plaques outside every school, and it says how many children were exported into the concentration camps. So it'll say, I think Anna's school was like 242 children. And you just look at that, and it's hard, but they keep history right there in the street. So that way, also in other ways, you'll say, this is where Oscar Wilde died. And you look up and go, okay, Oscar. Almost every building has got somebody lived there and something happened. So if you're observant, you're seeing lots of stuff that's not involved with climbing the Eiffel Tower for the 14th time. And I would recommend that. So. Yes, you're back.
The last time I was in Paris, which I think was 2005, I had 6 different guidebooks, and not one of them mentioned what a friend in New York mentioned to me, and that is, you must go to the Musée des Déportés.
I didn't go to that one.
You didn't? Do you know what I'm...
No, I don't know what it is. What is it?
It's the equivalent of a Holocaust museum, and no, I'm not Jewish. But it's in none of the guidebooks.
Yeah, I don't...
It's behind Notre Dame.
Okay.
It's all underground, and you go down stone steps, and I was there, it was December, right after Christmas. It was cold and sort of dank. You go down stone steps, and then there's an eternal flame.
Right.
And then carved in the wall, stone wall, is the name of every one of the 250,000 French people who were deported to the camps. And then it says, it's very moving because it's like, it just brings back the whole thing. And then it says in French, carved in the stone, we forgive, but we do not forget.
Right. That's what all the schools say. You shall never be forgotten.
But it's just, it was
sounds
strange
lovely.
to me that no guidebook ever mentioned it.
But you know what? That makes total sense. I mean, I looked at all the guidebooks too, so I didn't find it. But it makes sense because for the French, those plaques are for themselves. And I bet that museum is for themselves. Forget the tourists. This is for us and our children, so we do not forget. They wouldn't. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
But the museums, I have bought your book, so the museums you mentioned in the back of your book, are they in guidebooks, some of those smaller?
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. Some of them I found, like the Musée Jacques Lemart-André is in the guidebooks. I ended up going 4 times. So I found things like there's a little Ganymede in an alcove on the 2nd floor that you only find when you're bored out of your mind, and you're going through for the 4th time. But so it's there. They're definitely there. I just think that when most people go to Paris, they don't have time. They think I've got to go to Versailles, and I've got to do this, and I've got all these things to do in my 5 days. And so I put them in the back because I was like, you got 5 days. Go to the Jacques Lemart-André and go to the Musée de la Vie Romantique the next day. It's not that great a museum, but it's a lot of fun, and it's got a beautiful cafe, and kids can run around in the garden. So I guess one of the things I was trying to do with this guide is just say, don't do that stuff. Go to the Holocaust Museum, which I've never heard of, That sounds great.
Déportés is what they call it.
Déportés.
But it's because it's underground, you look in back of Notre Dame and you say, I don't see anything.
Right.
Because and then you see this very discreet little opening.
So the Museum of those Deported.
And you go down underground.
Very
That's
hard.
really amazing.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yes, where is the museum that you were just discussing, the Baron?
It is, and I've got it here. I've got it, yeah, I give you, it's on 63 Rue de Monceau. And it's you walk through this amazing park. This is very interesting because the park is where everyone goes to get married.
What arrondissement?
I don't remember. I've got the website there, so if you get the book, the website's there. But it's the Parc Monceau, which is where everyone gets married.
Oh, okay. So
Do you know where that is? Okay. So you walk through the park and you will literally see like 4 marriages. And a lot of them are not going to be French people because, Paris is a destination wedding, right? So it's really fascinating. I walked through one time and it was like, okay, here's a Japanese wedding. And then it was like, here's an American wedding. We never did see a French wedding. We saw, it was like 4 different kinds. There was a wedding of people who had biked all the way from England. They biked to Paris along with their family and friends, and now they were all getting married, or the main couple was getting married in their biking gear. So it's a fun, again, a great place to go, just to go somewhere different. Yes?
I have a question not related to Paris. You're a teacher at Fordham.
Mm-hmm.
What do your students think of your book and your experience, and have they acknowledged it yet?
Sure. I mean, I've been on tour for the last 3-4 weeks, so I missed some classes. I'm teaching my first genre fiction class. So it's got 35 kids in it. About half of them are writers. Most of them are people in communications. So every week it meets once a week. Every week we've had 2 visitors, say an agent and a publisher, or I'll give you an example. We had 1 week, we read a different genre every week. So 1 week we were reading Joe Hill's The Heart-Shaped Box. Has anyone read it? It is a horror, the first book of horror by Stephen King's son. And he came out as Joe Hill. He did not want to be associated with his father. So, I haven't read Stephen King, but I think this book's probably better written than Stephen King. He got an MFA at Columbia. But anyway, we read that book, and then I got the PR agents to come in who did the campaign for the Heart-Shaped Box. They brought in all their materials so they could show them the actual PR campaign, and then they discussed how they got it to number 6 in the New York Times list without saying that it was Stephen King's son. So, and then, he's around. So we had a lot of that. Mary Higgins Clark came, so that was fun. But I forgot why I'm deviating into this. Oh, what did they think? Oh, well, they were kind of watching this year, and then we just had cupcakes because it's been on the New York Times for 3 weeks. So Wednesday was my final class, so I brought in cupcakes, and they were all very celebratory as they are in the face of food. They liked it. Yes.
I assume you love the food from Paris for the most part, right?
Except in the restaurants, yes.
Have you picked up cooking French? Do you cook at home now that you're here?
No.
French in New York?
No. I mean, one of the really interesting things about writing this book was that I was going to have time to cook, right? I actually like cooking. And I realized when I was there that the food that I like best is the food that I've known for a long time. So I did give you some recipes, but they are, for example, from Marina's risotto, which is, she could be out cooking, Bobby Flay any day. So I did things like that. In the end, I started out by making violet mustard colored chicken, and my kids would not eat it. And then I was buying all this exotic stuff, and no one would eat anything, and I was putting sauces on, they were like, yuck. And I finally got to the place where I realized that we eat best very simple food. And of course, we had a lot of really bad food in Paris. A lot of bad restaurants in Paris. It's unbelievable how bad they are. That was one of the interesting things, how much the French, because we were actually in non-tourist restaurants, how much bad food they put up with. Insane. I think mostly they don't eat out very much, so they eat at home, because if you go, we were in the habit of shopping every day, which is what you do, and then go home and you eat wonderfully, so I don't think they eat out too much. Yes? No, I have the kind of personality that kind of looks ahead. So I was psyched about moving to New York. And then, it was a whole year, so I really missed my department and I missed my students. I like teaching. This is the first time I've taught writing. I always teach Shakespeare. And so teaching Shakespeare is one of those things that you teach it so many years in a row, and every year there's one line that I realize something new about, or some student will say something different. So I was glad to come home. I'm very American. It's true. I didn't fit in, wash in. Yes?
Well, like you said, you were not going to learn French or anything, but as I'm listening to you pronouncing your other French words, sounds like you didn't.
That would be drilling by my husband. It's like, You cannot embarrass us when you go out on tour. He drilled me on everything. But I have to say that pronunciation is not so hard because I have to speak Italian, because Marina and none of the Italian families speak any English. And that is one place where you're not going to find people speaking English. Italians just don't bother. And they're incredibly good-natured, though, and they don't care whether you speak Italian. If you try, they're happy. If you don't, it's fine. Again, credit card and a smile will get you a long way. Italy. But I mostly tend to give it an Italian tinge. But it doesn't really matter that much, I think. Yes?
Are you still in that apartment that you had such a horrible interview to get?
I am. We bought that apartment. And the thing is, the last chapter in here, yeah, no, they haven't found out yet. The last chapter describes our co-op interview, which had some very unfortunate discussion of bed bugs and schizophrenia. And I basically had a panic attack afterwards in the street. And I put it in here, and the lawyer from Random House had to check everything. Domitila's parents had to sign off on this. They were incredible. They're like, our daughter is immortalized. I was like, well, not quite, but everyone had to sign off from it because of the way it is now with lawsuits and everything. And so I was, well, what about the end? Are they going to sue me because I described what the co-op board interview was like? And they said, no, they're not going to sue you, and they never ever talk to you again. As far as I can tell, no one has found out. This is the joys of publishing under another name. So, yet, anyway. And then last question, one last question.
So when you made this decision, and I was so impressed that your husband was willing to go along and to sell your house, but it sounds like you had the idea that you were going to go to Paris for a year.
Right.
Or and then there was going to be that's a whole other thing to make a decision to come back and live in New York, maybe you make that decision ahead, or it's not really that far from New Jersey, but that was a whole nother.
That was a second step, yeah. The year is because sabbatical is 1 year long. And Alessandra took a leave of absence, and that's 1 year.
But to sell your house,
yeah.
that's really advanced.
That was nerve-wracking. We sold the house, and as you know, it's not a good market. So we were like, well, maybe the house won't sell. It sold in 3 days. I think we underpriced it. Whatever. It got flipped. So
you sort of had an end game in mind that you're on sabbatical for a year, and you're able to be away for a year.
Yeah.
But by selling your house, you made this decision that we're going to change.
we're going to change.
Yeah.
We're going to learn from this, and we're going to change. And we're going to figure out what we want to do. Do we want to go back into another house in the suburbs? Do we want to move to the apartment? And then we realized we really loved living in an apartment in Paris. And you'll see the description of the apartment is very interesting. It's the apartment that belonged to the French ambassador to the Dominican Republic. And they're very sweet. Their daughter just spent 10 days with us. And she was like, my apartment is immortalized. She's very excited. But we realized that we loved living in an apartment. Because we had 4 stories in New Jersey. And number one, everything gets lost. But number two, you never know where the kids are. Everyone's, Alessandra's in the attic. And I'm here, and you never heard anyone. And once you're on one level and you're in the apartment, again, it's part of, we have dinner together. We see each other, We do have to pry my son out of his room. But other than that, we're all there. And so we realized that apartment was the right place for us to go back to be able to carry this with us. Something different. So, thank you very much. I'm just going to give you one little lecture, which I've been doing on my tour, which is that you may not realize this, but the Department of Justice has launched a lawsuit against the major publishers saying they colluded on the prices of books. And the reason for that is the publishers wanted to all sell their books for like $16.99 because Amazon is acting in such a way that they've decided to use books as the gatekeeper. So I'm sure you all have Amazon accounts, right? You go to Amazon, you buy a book, because I see it. Come to my site, you buy a book, and then you buy a gold-plated washing machine. And Amazon pays me a little percentage of what you paid for the washing machine. So I see everything that everyone bought. And what I see is you buy 2 books and you buy this long list of stuff, other stuff, right? And what Amazon has decided is they're going to cut the price of books and they're going to take the loss. So they would cut the price of every book down to nothing, take the loss in order to get people to buy the vacuum cleaner. And they then lobbied the Department of Justice, which is stuck in a hard place because the publishers did, in a sense, collude, because they were like, okay, we've got to keep our prices at this, or the independents and the publishers cannot survive. So I'll give you an example. Barnes & Noble, Borders, went out of business. They could not handle this to some extent, what was happening with Amazon. They also had other stuff going on. But Barnes & Noble decided to lower the price to 46% for Paris in Love in January for pre-orders, right? So they're like, we'll do this great thing. I wrote them a separate essay on the Eiffel Tower, and they lowered it to 46%. 5 hours later, Amazon dropped to 50%. So Barnes & Noble had to drop to 50%, right? They can't afford 50% though, so on the day of publication, they had to go back up to 46% because that's the lowest they can afford. They had thought on publication they would go back up to like 20%. So what I'm saying and lecturing you is, I'm just asking you to, if you're going to buy the book, buy it from an independent bookstore or from Barnes & Noble, because we need our bookstores to survive. Minneapolis, which is my hometown, has lost both of its independent bookstores. The only person who can afford to do it now is Garrison Keillor, who opened one because they were all dead. But Barnes & Noble is listed on the 5 companies most likely to go bankrupt in 2013. So I think we need bookstores. We need places where people can go and actually see and feel books and discover a new book. Because when you go on the online sites, you kind of buy what you're going to buy, right? You need to be able to send kids somewhere so they see other books, so they discover people, so you talk in a community. So anyway, that's my lecture. Thanks.